At this time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Ruth Potee is with us tonight to provide information on the adolescent brain development and the impact of this on teen behavior and risk-taking. Dr. Potee comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and career experiences around substance abuse, and she was named Franklin County's Doctor of the Year by Massachusetts Medical Society in 2015, and serves on community task forces such as those that help us here at Algonquin, such as but not limited to the Opioid Task Force of Franklin County, to continue to share her expertise. It is with great respect and honor that we welcome Dr. Potee here tonight. Thank you.
You guys are all super brave being here because it's really unpleasant outside. So all of you lovely people in the back all have bionic vision. If you think you're going to see these slides, there's no way. They're super small. So I'm just saying there's lots of room up front. I love to actually look into people's faces. And you guys way in back, I can't even see your faces because my vision has decreased. So come move down. I'd love for you to move down. And you can move down at any point during the talk, and it will not bother me. I will welcome it. So we are going to spend time talking about this extraordinary organ in your body known as the human brain. And you know, when you're born, I took care of a baby today who was 2 days old, and that baby's kidneys and that baby's liver and pancreas were doing the exact same thing on day 2 of life as that they will be doing on the final day of their life. They don't change that much. I mean, they degrade a little bit, but not much. The brain, on the other hand, is this organ in the body that makes some massive shifts during human development. And we're going to spend time talking about what happens in middle school and high school, in particular between the ages of 12 and 24. This is an article that is the cover of National Geographic in September of 2017. And National Geographic, who grew up with a subscription to National Geographic, right? And did you guys keep stacks of them in your basement? Like you never would recycle them? When we finally sold our house after 30 years, there were thousands of pounds of National Geographics. It's an old school 1940s magazine, but the cover of National Geographic was the physiology of addiction. And it talked about all the very complicated ways that the brain breaks with addiction. We're going to talk about how the brain breaks with addiction, and we're going to understand it in a way that we all can understand together. What happens with the brain with addiction is it impacts the part of the brain that tells you to survive, to live or die. The part of the brain, this most ancient, elemental reward circuit of the brain, tells you to find food, find water, and find a mate to send your genetic material forward. Because as a Homo sapien, being a member of this human race, the entire purpose of us is to actually live long enough to make a couple generations ahead of us and to keep them alive. Now, most of us don't wake up in the morning and think like that, but I'm telling you, after the zombie apocalypse, that is the part of the brain that will kick right in. It is this part of the brain that breaks with addiction. It is why it is so hard to treat addiction. It is why it's so important to prevent addiction. It's a truly preventable disease. So racing through this reward circuit of this brain, this most ancient part of the brain, is the chemical called dopamine. And what does dopamine do to you? Yeah, it gives you happiness. It gives you joy. It's a sense of euphoria. It's this, holy smokes, that was awesome. Do it again. That's what dopamine does to the brain. With dopamine are 2 behaviors, and those behaviors are compulsion and perseveration. I have to do this. I am unable to stop thinking about this. And when it comes to survival, being compulsive and being a perseverator, those are awesome behaviors. And your ancestors, your greats, they were compulsive and perseverating. They had to be, because it was so hard to survive anywhere in the world 200 years ago. Forget 2,000 years ago. But can you guys imagine living in Northborough 200 years ago on a night like tonight? Are you kidding me? Half of us would have been dead. You know, your only source of heat was wood. Maybe you didn't put enough away. You were hungry all the time. And whatever water you had was deep frozen. Like, you spent your entire night worrying about your kids and your water and did you have enough calories. And that wasn't that long ago, my friends. It was 200 years ago. It was, you know, greats back. So these behaviors of compulsion and perseveration are awesome when it comes to surviving, right? You needed them. And they are what is related with dopamine in the brain. But because addiction also impacts this brain, and dopamine is a huge part of addiction, compulsion and perseveration are 2 behaviors that define addiction as well. So who in this room is in the medical therapy healthcare field, right? And so you guys take care of people who struggle with a substance use disorder, and I know for a fact you didn't just see them once. In fact, I see some of my people again and again and again, 20 or 30 times over, with continued relapsing disease. And sometimes I get frustrated because it can be a frustrating disease, but I remind myself that compulsion and perseveration define their behaviors, and it is why they continue to relapse and are sitting yet again at my treatment center, or at the jail, or wherever I'm seeing them. So I make an argument that we all have a certain amount of dopamine in our brain, and some of us are these happy-go-lucky, the golden retrievers on the planet, and our baseline dopamine is like 108. But on average, maybe everybody in this room is at 100 units of dopamine. But we know these golden retriever people, they exist. I'm not one of them, actually. I actually think I have low dopamine. Maybe my baseline dopamine is 92. And I do all of these things during the day that make me feel better. So what do you do in this room that makes you feel better, that gives you a spike in dopamine? Exercise, that's the one I do. What else? Eat. A lot of us eat. There you go. Is it good for us? Maybe not, but a lot of us specifically turn to sugar. Sugar's a massive dopamine spiker, absolutely. What else do people do? Sing, right. People sing, they dance, they listen to music. I love that one. A lot of our kids do that. Like, when I'm asking you what it is you do for dopamine, I want you to ask yourself, what are your kids doing for dopamine? And you hope it's sort of healthy stuff for dopamine, right? You want your kids to be singing, listening to music, hanging out with their friends, snuggling with a pet on the couch. Those are all dopamine builders in the brain. What we're going to spend time thinking about, though, is there are several things that cause massive spikes in dopamine that aren't so good for the brain. So if your brain at a baseline has 100 units of dopamine, and let me be clear, you don't call your family doctor tomorrow and ask for a dopamine measurement. This is not a real thing. Dopamine is real, the amounts in the brain are real, but it's not measurable in a serum blood draw. If everybody in this room is sitting at 100 units and you realize that you can keep your family alive 200 years ago because you just were able to kill a 5-point buck, you get a spike in dopamine. Your dopamine goes to 150 and then it goes back to normal because that's your brain saying, holy smokes, that is awesome, do it again. You have sex, it's consensual, your dopamine goes to 200 and then it goes back to normal. These are normal variations in dopamine in the brain that allow you to stay alive. When you use a drug like cocaine, your dopamine goes to 350. When you use a drug like a strong prescription opiate or heroin or these days fentanyl, your dopamine goes between 500 and 900. And when you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine, your dopamine will go to about 1300. So those are some giant dopamine numbers, right? Crazy. And what I sometimes wonder is why are we not waking up every day and taking a hit of meth? Because it seems like it's a good idea, except we realize it's not a good idea because we think about it for a second. So there's 3 things in this equation that control the dopamine in your brain. How much dopamine gets produced, how many dopamine receptors are on the other side of the synaptic cleft receiving the information, and how many little vacuums are sucking dopamine out. Cocaine works in only one way. It's very specific. It's the most easily understood substance that is an addictive substance. All it does is turn off the vacuum. It shuts down every vacuum in sight, and when the vacuum is shut down, the dopamine builds up to 350. And you would think to yourself, wow, easily understood mechanism of action, we should be able to fix that. I should have a little medicine or vaccine you could take that then makes the vacuum immune to the effect of cocaine. That doesn't exist. I wish it did exist. We have no effective treatment for people who struggle with cocaine use disorder, nothing. I just look at you and I say, stop. It's bad for you, stop your cocaine. That's the best I can offer people. The way opiates works more complicated. It goes through a negative feedback loop through the mu opiate receptor and it hits the GABA receptors, but at the end of the day, every opiate, whether it's a prescription opiate, a synthetic opiate, something you buy on the street, it shoves more dopamine out into the active part of the brain. Now, we could do this with every addictive substance. We could talk through where the dopamine equation is impacted. We could talk about addictive behaviors like gambling or sex or gaming, because some of those can be very addictive behaviors for people. At the end of the day, it always ends up impacting the dopamine system. But here's the problem. When your body, your brain, for 200,000 years that you've been in this human form on this planet has been used to levels of dopamine of 95 or 150 or on a really awesome night, 200, when your brain starts seeing dopamine levels of 350, 900, and 1300, it says, holy smoke, something's wrong with that. That's not okay. These are not normal levels of dopamine. I need to turn down the volume. I need to down-regulate. So the brain's response to addiction is it erases 80% of the dopamine receptors, it stops making dopamine, and it turns on every vacuum in sight to suck the dopamine out. That's what happens with addiction. So you wake up in the morning and your new dopamine level isn't a 95, right? You wake up in the morning and your dopamine level's a 40. You're miserable. You are a miserable human being. And I'm not talking about physiologic withdrawal symptoms. Your brain doesn't have a level of chemical in it that is consistent with survival. So your brain is screaming at you from the minute you pop out of bed saying, you feel terrible and you know how to fix this. You do know how to fix this, right? It involves running down to the liquor store. What time's the liquor store open? It's only 7. Hopefully it opens soon, right? It involves going through your garbage can in your bathroom, scraping out any remnant of a powder that you could inject. Right? People are desperate to feel normal. When you struggle with an addiction, you're not chasing a high anymore. Those days of getting a 1300, you got that one time only. You will never get that again. You have decreasing levels of reward in your system, and by the time you're struggling with a deep addiction, you are chasing the feeling of normalcy every single day, which is why people continue to use. It makes total sense to me why people continue to use. What's amazing to me is when people say, I'm not going to use anymore. Because what they're saying is, I'm going to struggle through the next 30 and 40 and 90 days with a dopamine of 40, 43, 47. I'm going to slowly crawl my way back up that cliff. That's the extraordinary thing, is that people get better. And they do get better, but it's a hard path. So it's this concept of how the brain breaks with addiction. And we could do this. I could have talked about, type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes and the pathways that get disrupted between the pancreas and insulin and the glucagon receptors and all this stuff. It's all the same thing. Almost any disease in your body is a disruption in the messaging system between points A and point B. It's not any different with the brain. But the problem is that from a medical side of the world, and I have medical people in the room, we do look at this very differently. So I'm going to tell you a story about a guy from Northborough, because I can talk about this in any town and it can be accurate. So this guy is 68 years old and it's 5:30 in the morning on a street right by us. And he wakes up and he's rubbing his chest. And his wife says, what's wrong with you? And he says, I don't know, I don't feel good. And she turns on the light and looks at him and says, oh my God, you look terrible. I'm calling 911, right? We got Northborough police, I got fire, I got EMS. They're there in 7 minutes. And they're looking at this guy in his bedroom and saying, holy smokes, I think you're having a massive heart attack. And they give him a sublingual nitroglycerin, they make him chew a baby aspirin, they give him a beta blocker, they do an EKG from his bed, and they send it to Marlborough Hospital. Marlborough's like, don't send him here. No, bypass us, right? Get him down to UMass. Call UMass. They need to get the cath lab and the OR warmed up. He ends up at the big UMass hospital with quadruple bypass surgery. And he's going to be in the cardiac care unit for another week, and then he's going to be on telemetry for another week, and he's going to get a social worker because he gets depressed, and he's going to have 12 weeks of cardiac rehab at Marlborough. How much money we just drop on this guy? Would somebody say 10 grand? Okay, that was the ambulance coming to his house. Yeah, $250,000. Who said $250,000? That was the right answer. That was exactly, I think, what this cost. If we had sent him to Boston, it would have been $300,000. But I sent him to my nice local UMass, maybe $250,000. Okay, his next door neighbor, living right next to him in Northborough, is his 24-year-old girl. She went to this high school. She's a superstar athlete, a soccer genius, and she got a scholarship to Boston College to play soccer. And when she was 19 years old and a sophomore, she tore her ACL on her right knee. It was a serious injury. She had surgery, but she couldn't play anymore, and she lost her scholarship. And for her, she lost her entire world. She's 19 years old. She's no longer in college because she can't afford to go. She doesn't even know what to do with herself, but she realized after 2 surgeries that she felt better, she felt more normal, she was happy again when she used the oxycodone that the orthopedic surgeon gave her. And for 6 weeks, she kept going back to that orthopedist and saying, oh, my knee's not feeling good, I have pain in my hip now, I think I need more. And after 6 weeks, that guy was like, you're off. I don't know what's up with you, but I'm cutting you off. So she began buying pills on the street, and within about 2 months, she realized pills are too expensive, and she converted to heroin, which is the normal path that people take. So for the last 4 years, this young woman's life has been off track in every way imaginable. She's living in not the right neighborhood with not the right people. She's overdosed twice. She's had some very serious infections. But she made a decision a little less than a year ago to move back home with her mom in Northborough She cut herself off from everybody else. She's going to a local clinic and getting buprenorphine, also called Suboxone. She has a new therapist. She's doing yoga. She realizes she could be strong and healthy and not be a yoga collegiate athlete. A soccer collegiate athlete. That's fine. She's getting her life back together for the first time. And for the last 9 months, she's been awesome. And she just got a job down the street at Moe's, right? She's wrapping burritos. So things are great for her. But her mom knocks on the bathroom door this morning at 5:30, and there's no answer behind the door, and the door is locked. And her mom has been around the block and freaks out, kicks the door in, and finds that her daughter's lying on the ground, blue and not breathing. And that mom calls 911 first, and then she starts basic CPR, and then she administers Narcan, but her daughter doesn't come back to life. And by this time, I got Northborough Police in the building. They're there. They administer 4 vials of Narcan before her daughter comes back to life. And they bring her to the ER at Marlborough Hospital. And what happened to her? Nothing, maybe? Did anything happen? They discharge her, right? They send her home. There's no admission. They just send her home. They maybe watch her for 45 minutes because Narcan will wear off after about 45 minutes, and if you still have opiate on board, you'll overdose again. So they monitor her for 45 minutes, and then she's shipped out again. Okay, let's talk about her next door neighbor, that 68-year-old guy, because I didn't tell you his whole story. So both of his parents had significant cardiovascular disease. Both of his parents actually died in their 60s. His mom had a stroke. His dad had a heart attack. He smokes a pack and a half of cigarettes every day. He kicks back a 12-pack of beer every day. He goes to McDonald's at least 4 days a week. He would go 7 if his wife would let him. Does this guy have addiction? Yeah, what's he addicted to? What was that? Yeah, everybody named it. Lots of stuff: nicotine, alcohol, food, salt, sugar, the chemical that's in McDonald's food, name it. He's addicted to it. Did this guy create his heart attack? Yep, he did. He did. I'm giving him 100% on creating his heart attack. I'm not even going to give the genetics any role. Both of his parents were smokers. Once you get rid of tobacco in this family, there may or may not have been any genetics at play here. Tobacco is the #1 killer in our country. So this guy's an addict, right? But did anybody roll into his living room or in the emergency room at UMass or in the cardiac care unit and be like, you know what, you're an addict. I'm not going to provide medical care because you created this hot mess. The notion that I'm going to drop $250,000 on you when you made this mess happen, why would I do that? Why would anybody do this, right? But is that what we do in this country? No. Right. All day long, I'm a primary care doctor. That's what I do. I take care of chronic disease. Today, I took care of people who had a body mass index of over 60. They were really overweight. They are struggling with every disease imaginable. And if all I did is yell at them about their weight, they would never go see a medical provider ever. And instead, I sit there with them and I talk all around a lot of issues, and then I say, what else can we do to help you get healthier? What small little steps might we engage with to help you feel better in your body? What can we do so you can move better? Can we get you a free membership to the Y? Can we change your access to food? What little steps can we make? Because when you take care of people with chronic disease who struggle with a myriad of health issues, your job is to help move them very slowly down a path of change. Primary care is not sexy. There will never be a television program about primary care because our job is to help real people get better, right? And who in this room is perfect? Absolutely perfect with their health. Right there in the back, she's telling me. But in this room, I bet, because there's a lot of people here, I probably do have a marathon running, vegan, I don't know, what else does it take to be perfect? I mean, never eat sugar ever person. There's probably one of you. But most of us aren't perfect. Most of us sometimes eat junk, or we drink a little too much, or we haven't done our 30 minutes of exercise today, right? That defines most of us, right? But we don't shame and blame people. Our job is to meet people where they are and provide them help. But for this young woman, nothing was given to her. You know what somebody needed to do for her in the ER? This is what they needed to do. They needed to look at her and say, I hear you've been doing great. I talked to your mom in the waiting room, and she told me that for the last 9 months, you have pulled everything together, and you're doing great, and I'm really proud of you. But you know what we know is that people relapse. This is the time when people relapse. Between 6 and 12 and 15 months is when you feel so normal again. You feel so much better that you think you can use just one time, and you're going to be okay. That's the way the brain works. We know this is going to happen 90% of the time. So nobody needs to make her feel like a piece of trash, right? She already feels that way. Nobody else needs to add on, quite honestly, right? Somebody needs to say, you've been doing great. Relapse happens. This time and other times, it's going to kill you, because fentanyl is a serial murderer that is on our streets. And there is not much heroin left in this state that is not positive for fentanyl. It's 100 times the potency of heroin, and it's killing people. You use it once and you will die. So what can I do to help you get more stability? Maybe this is not the time for you to decrease the number of meetings you go to. Maybe this is not the time for you to decrease your number of therapy appointments. And maybe for now, when you get your check from Moe's, you can't really manage your money. Maybe I'm going to talk to your mom with your permission about her managing your money, just for now until we have more time built. That's the conversation that needed to happen. Not a single dollar needed to be spent on her. I needed a nurse, a ward clerk, anybody to have had that level of conversation. That's all, right? And instead, that didn't happen. And I'm not going after Marlborough Hospital or UMass. This is every single hospital in our nation treats these two people completely differently. And that's actually what has to change, right? That's the reason I do this work, is this has to change. From every level, we have to change. Okay, let's go back to the brain and dopamine, and these are PET scans that do coronal slices through the brain. And that middle section are all healthy brains. All you see there is a cascade of dopamine, the orange, racing through those brains. And those brains that are on the right are people who struggle with addiction. And when you look at that column, there's not a lot of dopamine. And for you people in the back, you can't see anything. But I'm telling you, the columns on the right, there's not a lot of orange. And that top brain is somebody who struggles with cocaine, and the next one down is crystal meth. The third one down is alcohol, and the final one is heroin. If you squint hard, you'll see with the alcohol brain, there is actually dopamine. The wheels come off the alcohol use disorder disease bus pretty late in the game. It takes a while. There's a lot of us who are functional alcoholics. We live with and we work with functional alcoholics, because it takes a while before your wife walks out on you and you get your second OUI and your performance is so bad at work that you start to lose your job. It takes a while. This is a very common disorder in our society. I will never underplay the harmful effect of alcohol on us as human beings. We're going to spend time on alcohol today. But there's three things that will be a setup for your kids to struggle with addiction. This is truly a preventable disease, but there's three things that put us as humans and our kids at risk. The first one is genetics. The second one is early exposure while the brain is developing. And the third one is having a high trauma score or having bad things happen to you when you're a child. So having poor mental health does not mean you're going to be somebody who struggles with addiction. It can be a subcomponent of all those other things. And the reason I'm going to spend time on this is because I want us to really get it. When you're 14 years old and you are paralyzed by unremitting anxiety, and it's so hard for you to even get to school, there's no way you're going to play volleyball, and you're just a wreck, and you realize that when you use a dab pen, which contains marijuana, that you feel better, your anxiety is better. It's not that the anxiety caused the addiction, it's that you self-medicated for your anxiety with an addictive substance, which happens all the time. So it becomes a situation where what you have is early exposure while the brain is developing. And for all of us who are parents of teenagers in this room, because I'm a parent of teenagers too, our kids are filled with anxiety. Does anybody else see that? Right? I mean, this is known nationwide. Who has a junior or a senior in this room? Right? How pretty is that? My kid is a wreck right now. I don't know how often your kids are crying, a junior, but my daughter is in tears every single day. She's a wreck, right? They need a lot of stuff coming at them to help mitigate their stress that they have, because our kids' lives are super stressful, much more stressful than they were for us. They just are. And why is it? It's complicated. This is not a anxiety talk in teenagers, but we can acknowledge when our kids are in trouble and they need therapy, they need tons of exercise. Sometimes they need medicine, they need massage work, they need mindfulness work, they need to stay present in their body. I'm hauling my daughters to yoga all the time, like all the time. They hate me for it, but they always tell me afterwards they feel better. So the genetics of addiction are incredibly strong. It's really hard to find any other disease in medicine where the genetics are this potent. If you have a parent or a grandparent with addiction, you have about a 50% chance of developing addiction yourself. So who needs that little piece of information? Yeah, everybody but the kids. Your kids actually need to understand their genetic risk for addiction. And I actually think that's a really uncomfortable thing for a parent to hear me say. But it really matters, because when you talk to your kid about their genetic risk for addiction, you're not saying, look, it's all over for you. The path is written. You're in big trouble. Instead, what you're saying is, look, we have very high genetic risk in our family. But if you do this next thing well, you can actually erase the genetic risk. That's the extraordinary thing. The genetics, if you do the next thing well, actually almost entirely disappear. So your kids actually get to drive the bus when they're given the information. Because what we know about addiction is that it is considered an adolescent developmental disease. It starts while your brain is developing. If you can get to the age of 22, 23, or 24 not having used an addictive substance, the likelihood of developing an addiction is about 2%. If you have a parent or a grandparent with addiction, which means you started off at 50% and you can postpone use to the ages of 22, 23, or 24, the rates of addiction go down to 5%. So even though the genetic risk is there, if your kid postpones their use until their brain is closer to full development, they almost entirely erase the genetics. Where else do they ever get to do that, my friends? If I looked at you and said, you will never have cancer ever in your life if you do this one thing well by age 24, most of us would be like, okay, sign me up. Tell me what it is. I need to do well by age 24 so I don't get cancer, right? That's what most people would say. This is why you tell your kids about their genetic risk, is because you are not leaving them a sense of hopelessness or a sense of, well, it's set in stone. This is just who I'm going to be. Instead, you say to your kids the way I said to my kids, we have a high genetic risk of addiction in our family. You three in my life sitting in front of me at my kitchen counter are at particular high risk because of these genetics, and for that reason, you need to delay your use as long as possible. Don't ever smoke cigarettes. Cigarettes are disgusting, and I'll be really mad if you start smoking cigarettes. But alcohol, marijuana use, other drug use, postpone it as long as you can, because you will be protected from the long-term scourge of this disease. So when you are 15 years old and you start drinking, and drinking here is defined as 2 alcoholic beverages a week, 40% of those 15-year-olds go on to be alcoholics. If you wait till age 21, starting your 2 drinks a week at age 21, only 7% go on to be alcoholics. 7% is almost half the national rate of alcohol use disorder. So it's all about postponing use. That's all it is. So a lot of us, in fact, almost all of us have teenagers at home. And I was in high school in the 1980s, and I know what we did with alcohol in our house in the 1980s, right? And I don't know, maybe other people did the same thing. But you would empty out your parents' liquor cabinet, and you would fill it with water, or colored water if you were being super tricky, right? And our alcohol use came from our own houses. So when I came home, when my oldest was 11 with a lock, and I locked up a cabinet, I put all the alcohol in it, my kid was like, Mom, what's up with you? Do you not trust me? And I'm like, nope, I don't. Right? Because you are an impending teenager, and I will not be the house from whence alcohol is taken. It's not going to be me. You may get it from somebody else's house, which will also tick me off, but you and your friends aren't going to be drinking from my house. It makes drinking at my house really hard. My husband will look at me and be like, does anybody remember the code? And I'm like, I don't know, you could try this, but it makes it a lot harder to drink. So our kids actually are making great decisions about many things. When you ask, I have kids in the room in the way back, but when you ask a teenager what they think about cigarettes, what do they say? Do I have a teenager back there somewhere? I saw some walking in. What do you guys think about paper cigarettes? Exactly. Did you hear that? Gross. That is the #1 word you hear. Gross, disgusting, revolting. Those are the 3 right there, right? They're disgusted by them. I have had kids in the back of a high school be like, it causes, obviously, lung cancer. It causes bladder cancer. It paralyzes the cilia and the lungs and the sinuses. It makes you all wrinkly. And I'm like, I don't know what public health service campaign you've been listening to, but it's been really effective because our kids think cigarettes are disgusting. And the rates of cigarette use amongst high school seniors is like 2% or less. This generation is so good and so smart that they will eradicate paper cigarettes. That's how good they are. We're going to get to vaping in a minute, okay? We're going to go there. But I'm just saying, their sense of harm with cigarettes is high, so their use is down. The problem is their sense of harm with marijuana is extremely low. So what do our kids say about pot? It's legal. Of everything you guys are about to say, that one is true. It's legal over the age of 21. Okay, what else? It's natural. It's organic. It grows in the ground. It's better than the pharmaceutical industry. Yep. It's not addictive. You hear that one all the time. What was that one?
There's drugs in them. There's tons of
Most kids won't say that, but I think there are some other chemicals for sure in the growing of marijuana. There's a lot of heavy metals. It's a complicated conversation. Tell me other things that our kids might say about it. Yeah. They always say that. They always say it's safer than alcohol. They compare it to the other legal drug out there. Always. Anything else? It helps me. It's medicine. It helps my anxiety. It helps me sleep. It cures cancer. It cures seizures. I get that all the time, right? You hear that. So you guys did it. You covered basically the entire list. Oh, you can't overdose on it. It won't kill you. So that's the list of what our kids say. So again, the sense of harm is unbelievably low, and the use, as you know, is going up and up and up. So we're going to spend time on pot because we have to. As much as nobody wants to, we are going to dive in deep. So 3 things happen between the ages of 12 and 24. It happens in middle school, it happens in high school, and all the way through college. The first thing that happens at this age is something called synaptic refinement. Your brain has tens of billions of synapses racing through this brain. It's a hot, tangled mess when you're 12 years old. And what must happen in that next 10 years is you need to prune it back, you need to clean it up, you need to get rid of like half of everything in there. Your brain is not atrophying, it's getting better and smarter and making better decisions. There are times during adolescence where you are losing 30,000 synapses a second. I look at my 14-year-old and I'm like, oh my God, you're losing 30,000 synapses right in front of me right now, right? I hope it's good. The second thing that happens in this big 12-year span of time is you ensheath rapid pathways in the brain. You insulate these good, rapid decision-making pathways. You build superhighways in the brain. So these kids in their brains that we have, that we're parenting, that we're teaching in class, that are sitting in our guidance office, these kids' brains are totally amazing. They're not faulty, they're amazing. And this is normal development. So our kids' brains tend to have less consideration for bad consequences. There tends to be less than optimal planning. There tends to be very strong sensation seeking and a lot of physical output. You are heavily influenced by your peers. You tend to have this enormous emotional spectrum, like enormous emotional spectrum. You are hypersensitive to social exclusion. That defines adolescent. When you were in 2nd grade and you were sitting by yourself in the cafeteria, you're sitting by there, you're eating your bologna sandwich, you're making a hat out of a napkin, and you do not care because you're in 2nd grade. And when you're 24 and you have your first job and you're sitting by yourself in the work office place cafeteria, you're reading the New York Times on your phone and you're eating a salad and you're fine. You don't care. But when you're 14 years old and you're by yourself in this cafeteria, every single eye in the universe is on you and you're wondering, is it something I'm wearing? Is it that stupid thing I said during math? Is it because I didn't score yesterday playing soccer? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me that I can't even have anybody sit with me? Like, it is a miserable way to be. But yet this is what defines adolescence. So this is this notion of the looking glass self. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am. That is how it feels to be a teenager. That is not a good way to feel. And if I have adults in this room that read this and they're like, oh, that's me, you need a therapist. Seriously, I need to find you a therapist because you need to grow out of this stage. This is not a place you need to be. This defines adolescence. This has to do with, I need to find my people, I need to find my herd, and I do not want to be excluded. And it's the reason why your great, smart, lovely, athletic kid is vaping, even though you think, I taught you better than that. They are trying to not be excluded. They are just trying to fit in because that defines adolescence. So again, there's nothing faulty about these kids' brains. They are pushing the limits. They're trying to figure out what synapses do I need to hold on to? What do I need to dump? They're amazing brains, in fact. We need to celebrate those brains, but we need to give them lots of positive things to do, and we need to shift to thinking about what normal behavior is. So there's a third thing that happens during brain development. We covered 2 of them. We did synaptic refinement and we did myelination. The third thing that happens is you lay down the outer shell of the brain, the cortex of the brain that's filled with dopamine receptors, which again, now that you guys all know about dopamine and why it breaks with addiction, is why all addiction starts while the brain is developing, is the addiction dopamine is getting laid down. What becomes active at this stage of the game is a naturally occurring neuroendocannabinoid receptor called anandamide. And we think anandamide's job is to help decide what gets pruned and what gets kept. Anandamide is the mirror image to THC, which is the psychoactive cannabinoid in marijuana. Your brain cannot tell the difference between those two things. It cannot tell the difference between this really critically important one that is trying to decide which of your 30,000 synapses you need to lose this second. It can't tell it apart from THC. And the problem is that THC is even more potent than your naturally occurring neuroendocannabinoid. So it's like using a sledgehammer in your brain to decide what gets kept and what gets thrown away instead of using a scalpel. You know, what happens to you as an adult over the age of 25 in the privacy of your own home with marijuana is on you. I don't want you on my roads. I don't want you babysitting my kids or operating on my knee. I actually don't think after your brain is fully developed that marijuana is probably worse than alcohol. I'm not gung-ho about it. I did not vote for this referendum. I'm pretty ticked off about it. But what we know about marijuana while your brain is developing is that it is a neurotoxic drug. This is a performance-degrading drug. This is no performance enhancer. It is harmful to our kids. And if your job was to sell an addictive substance, who's your target audience? It's our kids, right? You think they're going to get me hooked? I'm 50 years old. That horse is out of the barn. You haven't gotten me, you're never going to get me. The target audience when you're selling an addictive substance is that group of kids that just walked in here. That is their audience. So don't try to tell me this is all health benefits for people with cancer, right? We've had medical marijuana, right? There's medical marijuana in over 30 states in this country. That's not who this is for. This is an industry that is hell-bent on making billions, tens of billions of dollars, and they will be targeting our kids because they have to. In order for this to succeed, they're the ones they have to addict. So we know it has an impact on attention, verbal learning, processing speed, memory, and that continues even when you're not high. This is a super complicated slide, and my people in the back aren't going to see it, but you're going to squint and see it. So I'm going to compare two lines here. This is a study that comes out of New Zealand, and it covers a span of time of 30 years. It starts by following people who started using marijuana when they were teenagers, and it follows them up to the age of 40. So the light gray line on top are kids who used marijuana 0 times between the ages of 14 and 21. And I'm going to compare it to the dark red bar on all three graphs. Those kids used marijuana 400 times or more during the ages of 14 to 21. So graduating from college by age 21, the kids who used marijuana 0 times graduated from college 36% of the time. The kids who used marijuana 400 times or more, which by the way, isn't that much. I'm covering 7 years of time. 400 uses of marijuana is using pot once or twice a week. That's not even heavy daily use, okay? Those kids graduated from college 2% of the time. Then let's look at just having a job by age 25. The kids who used marijuana 0 times were employed 21% of the time. The kids who used marijuana 400 times or more were unemployed 52%. So that for me is a kid who fails to launch, right? I like my kids. I love my kids. I want them to leave my house. I want them to graduate, go to school, go do something. Pay your own taxes, buy your own food, get out of my house. I do not want them living in my house because they have performance degraded their brains so much by smoking marijuana every day, right? That for us, I think as a society, is not a success story. So the problem, and this same study shows an 8-point drop in IQ by the age of 35. But the problem with every study we have on marijuana is it's based on the old marijuana. It's based on pot that is as recent as 1990s. And in 1990 and 1980 and 70, marijuana was THC 3% or less. That seed plant out there with 3% or less THC is no longer available, right? Grown in my fields in Western Mass, every marijuana plant is THC between 9% and 20%. That is just the way it is. Now, THC is one of the cannabidiols in marijuana, but it's the one that gets you high. It's the one that has the most harmful impact. And they intentionally grow it so it's the THC that is increasingly high. Then what we know is what our kids know about marijuana, which is it looks like this, right? This is not a fat roll joint from your childhood or your youth. This is shatter and butter and earwax. This stuff is the marijuana concentrates, and the THC in this is between 50 and 90%. That is what our kids are using. And if you think a 90% THC product in your kid's brain is helping your kid's brain development, you think it's making good decisions about what gets pruned and kept, I will argue with you all night long. It is not helping our kids. So we have a gazillion ways you can get pot into your system. You can smoke it, you can vape it, you can dab it, you can rub it on your skin as a potion, you can put it under your tongue, you can eat it, you can drink it in beer and milk and many other ways. But the most common way we see it, 70% of the market in Colorado are the edibles. These are edibles wrapped in sugar and chocolate. And in Colorado, they made a lot of look-alike stuff, right? So all of those are candy bars that are all really familiar to you. And you look at the back of those packaging, every one of those candy bars has 12 servings in it. So the last time you guys took a Kit Kat and you broke it into 12 pieces, and you put one piece in your mouth and you put the 11 pieces in a bag was never in your life, because that's crazy, right? 12 servings in a candy bar, and the THC in those candy bars was between 50 and 80%. So incredibly potent things, completely mislabeled, unbelievably confusing, is what's coming to your recreational marijuana store. Now, what won't be coming here? You're not going to be allowed to have look-alike candy. You won't be able to do the Kit Kat Oreo exact look-alike. That is not allowed in Massachusetts. You're not allowed to have gummy animals. No gummy worms, no gummy bears, but you can have gummy cubes and gummy circles. So not a big difference, right? But it is actually part of the legislation in Massachusetts that you must sell edibles. It's just the way it is. And again, this stuff is targeting our kids. So is marijuana addictive, right? Several of you were like, they say it's not addictive. And we used to say that marijuana wasn't that addictive back in the old days with the old pot, right? Today's pot, that's not true for. So the old marijuana used to be 9% addictive compared to 32% for nicotine. But when you started when a teenager, it went up to 17%. And when you use today's marijuana, it's between 30 and 50% addictive, which makes it higher than nicotine, right? Here our kids are making these extraordinary decisions away from cigarettes. And we are putting in towns all around you stores that supply a drug targeting our kids that have a very high potency of THC, that are addictive, and actually degrade their brain. How did we do this, guys? How did this happen? Is there a store in Northborough? No, right? Not yet. But what are you zoned for? Are you zoned for a store to come? No? Southborough has a store open? They have a medicinal one, but medicinal ones can convert to a recreational license. You voted it out. Okay. So is Northborough and Southborough voted them out?
No, it's separate time.
Marlborough's having one come? Okay. Anyway, the point is, one will be coming near you, right? I just guarantee you it's not going to be far away. I live close to Northampton. Northampton was the first store, along with Leicester, to open. And the line outside the Northampton store, and it's been open now for, I don't know, a couple months, the line is still wraps around the block. They still have 5 police cars there every single day. The place is crazy. So for the first time in history, cigarettes are so far down that marijuana has surpassed them. Okay, I promise we're going to come back. We're going to do vaping. We're going to do some other stuff. But let's pause on alcohol, because I told you I was not going to skip alcohol, because alcohol is so present in our lives. So in this country, 1/3 of us drink absolutely zero alcohol. We never drink anything. 1/3 of us drink very lightly, a drink a week, couple drinks a month, very light social drinkers. And the final 1/3 of Americans drink every drop of alcohol in the country. The final 10% of us, on average, drink at least 10 drinks a day. Now, most of those people aren't here tonight, because at this hour, you needed to start drinking. By now, they're already home drinking, right? And that actually, I would argue, is the group that needed to be here the most, right? The final 10% of us who actually drink too much alcohol would have benefited, because their kids are at risk here, okay? So this is the thing, is I think people are like, 10 drinks a day, that's crazy, because it seems like a lot, but I want to remind you what it takes to get to 10 drinks. A beer is a 12-ounce, 5% beer. I drink a Bee Hoppy from Wormtown in Worcester. Awesome beer for those of you who also like it. It's a 7.8% alcohol, and it comes in a 16-ounce can. That's 2 beers, right? That's what that is for me. It's 2 beers. I just have to acknowledge what I just drank. The truth is I can't even finish it because it's too much for me, but I have to acknowledge what goes into my body. Who is a bartender in this room? You were a bartender. Okay, so 1.5 ounces is equal to 1 drink. When you're making a cocktail, how many drinks might be in a cocktail? 3. 2 or 3, you're making a Long Island iced tea, that has 6, right? It's very rare you go for a cocktail and you're counting that as 1 drink. You can't count that as 1 drink. That's at least 2, okay? You just got to do your math. Just be reasonable. Don't lie to yourself. This is our real issue these days, is this. This is an issue here, okay? And I know this because I know you're part of the world. I lived around in this neighborhood. I know what the 495 world looks like. I talk to women every day. Tell me about your relationship to alcohol. Oh, you know, I have a couple glasses at night. I'm like, oh yeah, what do you drink? I drink wine. How much are you pouring? You know, a normal wine glass, right? And I'm like, uh-huh. So this is what a glass of wine is. It's 5 ounces. That's all, 5 ounces. And I say to my patients, just put 5 ounces of water into your wine glass and acknowledge that is a glass of wine. And if you realize you're actually glug, 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 glugging, and every time you pour yourself a glass of wine, you're probably pouring yourself 3 glasses of wine, I need you to ask yourself, why are you doing that? What's that about, really, right? Are you doing it because you're trying to manage the stress in your life? You're trying to find some transition from your hard work life to your hard home life? I'm a working mom. I totally get it, right? I want to drink every night too, but I know it's not good for my health. And when I walk in the door after a terrible day at work, and the first thing my kids see me do is uncork a bottle of wine or flip the top off a beer, the message I give to my kids is that when you feel bad, if you drink, you feel better. You know what? That's not the message I wanted to send to my kids, right? I walk in after a terrible day at work. They ask me how my day was. I say, I had a terrible day. I think I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to go ride my stationary bike. I think I'm going to go walk the dog. You want to come walk the dog with me? I'm going to go turn on my John Kabat-Zinn on my iPhone, and I'm going to go meditate for 10 minutes. That is positive role modeling for how to manage stress. And you know what we do as adults? We drink. It is very rare for your kids to see you at a party where alcohol is not prominent. It just is. It's prominent. Women in particular, we go out with our girlfriends and we drink. It's the norm for us. It has become the norm. And this has been a very fast public health change where we are seeing more women who are struggling with alcohol use disorder at a younger age, and it happened in the last 15 to 18 years. It's really turned itself on its head. I never took care of women who were alcoholics, ever. 20 years ago, they almost didn't exist. Now it's about half my population of alcohol use disorder are females, young women. So I need you to acknowledge the role alcohol plays in your life, and I want you to ask yourself, why am I drinking? And if your answer is, because I need it, I want it, I'm craving it, it will make me feel better, you're self-medicating. It's not a good reason to drink. Pour yourself some seltzer water and go get some exercise, really. The health benefits of alcohol are 0, okay? I'm just telling you that. You know who says there are some health benefits? The alcohol industry. The federal government shut down a giant federal study last year because they were like, this is ridiculous. There really is no health benefit to alcohol. The cardiac protective, maybe 1 ounce of wine a week may have a modest benefit. You're going to open a $20 bottle of wine to remove 1 ounce a week? Of course you're not. That's crazy. You know what helps your heart? Exercise, meditation, eating whole foods. Much more healthy for you than drinking. Okay. People say this to me, but I want to train my kid to drink. They're going to college. I want them to know their limits. I want to get them. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Would you train your kid in how to smoke a bowl of weed? Would you train them in how to shoot heroin? Of course you wouldn't. Is it as bad? I don't know. I take care of a lot of alcoholics. This is a drug that destroys people's lives. Half of my jail people are there for alcohol use disorder, not for heroin, right? It is a harmful drug. So when we do studies on what happens when parents provide alcohol to their underage kids, what do we find? Oh, the rates of alcoholism and binge drinking are really high. So protect your kid's brain. Don't provide them alcohol. Don't you be the provider of alcohol under the age of 21, okay? Just don't. And if you think you're going to be the good parent by hosting the post-homecoming party at your house, first of all, it's against the law, right? You're providing or you're supervising alcohol consumption to a kid under 21. It's illegal. And you're not providing them any benefit. Your job as a parent to say, I love you no matter what. And if you're out there and you're in trouble and you're too inebriated to drive home or you're too drunk to drive home, please call me. Call me day or night. I will come get you and I will not say a word. I may say some words tomorrow, but I will not say a word tonight. I will do whatever it takes to rescue you out of any bad situation that you are in without judgment. I will postpone my judgment. Okay, so then people will say to me, the reason I throw these slides in is I get feedback from the audience and they say to me, but they're all good in Europe. Those kids in Europe are drinking at the age of 12 and they have no problems. And I'm thinking to myself, That's an interesting perception. So I went back and I looked at worldwide rates of alcohol use disorder, right? What are the top 25 countries in the world struggling with alcohol? Oh, all 25 of them are in Europe, with the exception of South Africa and South Korea. Otherwise, the other 23 are European countries. So there's not a health benefit by starting drinking when you're 12. There just is not. When you look at the rates of fetal alcohol syndrome in, I'm going to say Ireland, because I just heard the statistic, 60% of pregnant women drink in Ireland. 6-0. And fetal alcohol syndrome in Ireland is 40 times the rate it is in this country. That's a big, bad number. Okay, third thing that predisposes you to addiction. I know you guys are being super patient. Okay, so first thing, genetics. Second thing, early exposure while your brain is developing. And the third thing is a strong history of childhood trauma. So who knows about the ACE score in this room? Are you guys therapists? You two? No? Therapists? Yeah. So ACE score. I have a handful of people who know this. So we're going to spend a few minutes because this is important to know. A big study came out in 1996. It came out of Kaiser San Diego, California. And they asked 17,000 people as adults, what happened to you in your house growing up? 10 questions, yes or no. Did these things happen to you? Done. Okay, these are the questions. I'm going to read some of them, not all of them. Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be harmed? Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Were you sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, support each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take you to the doctor when you were sick? Were your parents separated or divorced? Was there somebody in your family who was incarcerated? Was there somebody in your household with major mental illness? Did you watch your dad or stepdad physically abuse your mom or your stepmom? I may have missed one, but 10 questions about horrible things that happened to our kids, okay? Nobody can deny that list I just read is upsetting stuff. This is not a survey that's given to children. It's not given to high school kids. It's given to adults to reflect upon their childhood. And on a score of 0 to 10, if you score a 6 or a higher on the ACE score, you have just shaved 20 years off your life. If you score a 4 or higher on an ACE score, you're much higher likelihood to have a heart attack, to have emphysema, to have asthma, to have multiple broken bones. You're at substantially higher risk of addiction. It's just the way it is. Because when you're a kid who's living in fear all the time, when you're sympathetic fight or flight response is on all the time, 24 hours a day for years on end, it has an impact on the development of every single organ in your body, and that is not normal. Having cortisol levels, fear levels in your brain like that harm you. And if we can do one thing as adults is to help actually protect kids. It's one of the things our schools do so well. You know who knows the kids' ACE scores? School counselors, school nurses, teachers. They don't calculate it, but they know what's going on. They know that the kids are falling apart. They know they need more stuff. And trauma scores are really unbelievably high. Kids don't graduate from high school with a high trauma score. The suspension rates are 2.5 times the rate. And we're learning more and more about the impact. And guess what? Your kids don't get to control this part at all. We can acknowledge trauma, and we can get treatment for our kids who've been traumatized to prevent addiction. So again, 3 things: genetics, early exposure, and a history of childhood trauma. And my message to you is to talk to your kids. Talk to them. Don't be scared about talking about this subject, right? My kids are always like, Mom, you're always bringing up sex and drugs when we're with our friends. And I'm like, I know, that's okay. But the truth is their friends love it when I'm driving them around because I'm like all over the place. I talk about all sorts of things that their parents aren't talking about. And even though my kids are a little embarrassed, the truth is they're proud that they have a parent who will go into the details on stuff, right? Because guess what? Kids want to know. And the message to your kid is just postpone your use. Just delay it as long as possible. Don't stand there with your giant glass of wine and say, don't ever drink, it's going to kill you. That's a message that they're going to be like, that makes no sense. This is just about protecting their brains. So our kids, again, are making the best decisions that we have seen in 40 years. Every kid I have over there, best decisions. Lowest alcohol use disorder, they're going to eradicate paper cigarettes. Their illicit drugs are flat only because of marijuana. The problem, as everybody knows, is the e-cigarettes, right? And something happened in September, the summer of 2017, and I don't know what it was. I need like the forensic computer people to go back and figure out what was happening on Instagram and YouTube and what got passed around that summer of 2017. But we all went back to school and there were vape pens everywhere. And guess what school they're in? They're in this school because they're in every single school. My guess is almost every day dab pens and vape pens or e-cigarettes are picked up in this school because that's normal, right? And I asked the principal and she said, yeah, that's pretty darn normal here too. So dab pens are intentionally designed for marijuana use, right? So they don't smell like normal marijuana, but you're inhaling THC through a cool, like high-tech device. So the use of e-cigarettes has gone way high. The rates now is 1 in 5 high school kids have used an e-cigarette or juuling or vaping in the last 1 month. So 20% of our high schools nationwide. That's a huge number. And that happens really fast. Nobody was ready for this. I can't tell you how we were not prepared. And this is the thing, when you ask your kids what they think they're vaping, what do they tell you? Yeah, flavored air or flavored water, that's what they say. It's just nothing, Mom, it's no big deal. So this study came out 1 year ago, and in this study they took e-juices of all different flavors made in the United States, so not the vast majority of the product which comes to us from China, which is unbelievably unregulated, but the 70 products made in the US, all of which were labeled 0 milligrams of nicotine. What % of them had nicotine in them when we tested them in the lab? I love you guys. You guys said 100, 90%. So not quite 100, but 90% of these 0 milligram e-juices made in the US had nicotine in them, some of which had the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes, right? So you know what they're doing to our kids? They're lying to them. This industry is lying to our kids. Smartest decisions ever made by this generation in terms of nicotine, but they're getting backdoored by the nicotine industry to become addicted to nicotine. What do you guys think about that? Yeah, I mean, does that feel like this is really like something we're really proud of? How are we not controlling this? How is the state and federal government not protecting our kids from this? Do you guys have answers? First of all, where do you buy this stuff? Where can you buy it locally? 7-Eleven, at a gas station, right? Okay. How old do you have to be in Massachusetts to buy it? 21. Statewide now, as of January, 21. Now, it used to be town by town, 18 or 21, but everywhere in the state is 21. Who is sent in, have our police, I would love for somebody to do this, sent in a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old sting operation to go buy their vape products at the local 7-Eleven? I know most people haven't, but that's what I want to do, right? That for me is I want to send my 17-year-old daughter in to have her go buy e-cigarettes all over town. And I want the cops or the Board of Health or the mayor of the town or the select board to be right outside and go in there and be like, what are you doing to our kids? Because it's outrageous. The problem is that the vast majority of e-cigarettes don't come from 7-Eleven. Where do they come from? Online. And how old do you have to be online? Well, you have to be 18. Online, you have to be 18. But how are you 18 online? Right, check box, I'm 18. So it takes nothing to get them. We know this. It takes a credit card. And you guys see what they look like, right? These are not intended for long-distance truck drivers who are trying to quit smoking. These are come in little tiny apple juice boxes that look just like something a kindergartner would bring to school. They come in Ready Whip cans that look just like Ready Whip and Ready Whip flavors. They come in Nilla wafer boxes. These are the e-cigarette juice refills that go into your kid. This is targeted to our children. Late tonight, I want you guys to go home and start Googling around how you can buy e-juice and what they look like. It looks like this. It's outrageous that this stuff is being allowed, right? So Jules did not lie. Jules did not say we're nicotine free. Jules said we're chock full of nicotine. And in fact, every Juul pod is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. And in fact, it's more than equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. It has 200 puffs in it. When you smoke a cigarette, it's the first 1/3 of the cigarette with most of the nicotine. And the bottom 2/3 don't have as much, but not with a Juul. You get a steady hit with every puff all the way through. So in fact, these are much more addictive. And so our kids who are Juuling are super addicted to nicotine now, and they can't get through the school day. They cannot make it through the school day. They have to go out to the parking lot and use their Juul because they're addicted to nicotine. They're crawling out of the skin. They're super anxious. They're getting a little bit sweaty. They're addicted. And the average pediatrician out there has no idea how to take care of nicotine addiction because they never had to do it, right? And you know what? None of the products out there, the patch, the gum, the vaporizer, is not approved for kids under 18, right? The FDA has never approved that stuff, so we don't know what to do with these kids. They're addicted. And they're doing something illegal on school grounds, right? It's not such a great situation. So Juul, I'm not giving them credit because I'm pissed at everybody these days because they've made billions of dollars. They took away, at least in the stores, their fun flavors like the melon and the cucumber, right? You could still buy them all online, but they said we didn't mean for all the high school kids to get addicted. We didn't mean for that to happen is what they've said. So this is a harm. It's everywhere. You need to talk to your kids about this stuff. And if they say, Mom, you're such a freak, it's just flavor and water vapor, you tell them they're being lied to. There's no one regulating this industry at this time. We have no idea what they're vaping. And they should presume it is filled with nicotine. They should also presume, God knows what somebody hands them, it may have marijuana in it. Because dab pens are intended to use marijuana. Okay, and we have those in this school because we have them in every single school, which means your kid is coming to school and they're high. They're sitting in the back of English class and they're high. If I had a kid walk into the school with 3 nips in their pocket drunk, how would you feel about that? Not so good. It's not any different, my friends. This is not a good situation. But you know, I am going to tell you, our kids' brains are unbelievably resilient. They're elastic. They can change. So if you think your 16 or 17-year-old is struggling with marijuana or nicotine, we just need to have them stop or have them wean down or get them to not use it as often and try to move them away from it, and then their brain gets better. But if they're addicted to nicotine and they remain addicted to nicotine at the age of 24, 27, 28, right, it's harder and harder and harder for them to get off of this stuff. So if you have a kid who you know is actively struggling, let's try to scoot them away from it and know their brain will get better with time. Because great brains, these are amazing brains that are still changing. Okay, we're going to race through some stuff on opiates because I want to get to questions. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that the pills are on the hook for the opiate epidemic. The overprescribing of prescription medicine in the last 20-something years has been a disaster in this country. We prescribe more opiates than any other country in the world. You can see this on the chart. Do we have more pain than Canada has? Probably not. We're just like the Canadians. We have a very similar racial breakdown. We have similar rates of obesity and osteoarthritis and back pain, but we keep prescribing more and more pain pills. At this point, more people are dying from opiates than motor vehicle accidents, gun violence, AIDS at the peak of the AIDS epidemic. It's the #1 killer under the age of 50 is death by opiates. That's where we are today. So it's terrible. And I take care of people who struggle with opiate addiction every single day. So when you look at the country, this is a map that races through the country 2003 to 2014, and those red areas on the map is where addiction is increasing. And you just see the map starting to fill out as the years progress. And the problem is we don't start getting fentanyl in this country until about 2015 and 16. And at this point, New England is like deep maroon. It's not even red anymore in terms of overdose deaths. Most of the pills came to New England from Florida. And we used to call I-95 Oxy Highway. This is true in the 90s and into the early aughts. We all called it in the medical field Oxy Highway because the pills were getting distributed to us. There were 650 pain clinics in Florida. They would send tour buses down there. Your tour bus operator would pay for your meals and your hotel room. And all you needed to do was have a stack of cash and walk into 2 pain clinics a day. You didn't need to limp. You didn't need a diagnosis. You didn't need to be old. And you would be handed a bag of pills and a stack of scripts. You hand it back to your tour operator, and then they come back to Massachusetts and to Maine and to Kentucky, and they sell the drugs on the street. In 2009, the federal government looked at the state of Florida and said, you are such a disaster to the rest of the eastern seaboard. We're going to cut off federal funding because you're killing the country. So Florida said, okay, we got a problem, and the DEA swept in and they closed down the pill mills. They sent 34 doctors, licensed American-trained doctors, to federal prison because they were making, I don't know, $10 million a year. They were not doctors, they were drug dealers. The problem is I have 2 million Americans addicted to opiates up and down I-95. And I just shut down the pill mill. So what are you left with? Heroin, right? You're left with this unbelievably pure, cheap, unpredictable, and very deadly drug. Opiate prescription pills can kill people too. I don't deny that, but this is going to kill them 100 times faster. And we were not ready. In 2010 and 11 and 12, for those of us who were working in the field, we were like, holy smokes, what has happened to us? It's now 2019. We've been watching it happen to us for the last 8 or 9 years. We know what we're dealing with. It keeps getting a little harder, but we know what it is. So this is a map that looks at overdose rates. That bottom US map is prior to the shutdown of Florida, prior to 2010. You can see there's some states that have a high overdose rate. But when Florida gets shut down, the overdose rates really starts to soar. Don't get me wrong. I was delighted Florida got shut down. We were not prepared as a country to deal with the public health consequences of this, though, okay? Yeah, so the bottom map ends, it's 1999 to 2010. 2010 is when Florida gets shut down. And so the upper map is 2010 to 2015, which is when heroin really, really takes over, right? Because when you could afford pills, you would never use heroin. But now pills unavailable have become 10 times the price of heroin. So why would you spend money on pills when you could buy a bag of heroin for $3.50? You wouldn't do it. The economics make you convert to heroin, which is going to kill you. So in 2016 is where fentanyl gets widespread in Massachusetts. Massachusetts and New Hampshire are the #1 fentanyl states in the country. Yay, us. It takes this much fentanyl, which is that little tiny dust next to the penny. It takes that much fentanyl to kill you. So that's pretty easy to get into a number 10 envelope and shipped into the country and widely distributed, right? So this is not fentanyl that comes from your grandmother's cancer patch for her cancer. This is not a Duragesic patch. This is stuff manufactured, most of it in China, some of it in Mexico. And it gets shipped in some little bag, and then it gets mixed into our heroin supply. And people are dying. This is for us in Massachusetts, at least where I am from, the western part. 2018 was a terrible overdose year. So this is the country, county by county. And those dark counties are places where there's a very high level of opiate prescriptions still. So on average, between 1 and 1.5 bottles of opiates per person in that county. Look at New England. It's not much of New England. There's a couple rural counties up north where not many people live. But if you look at the place where opiate pills are still widely available, as that gets shut down through federal regulation, through pharmacy regulation, through insurance regulation, those areas will convert to heroin too. And the prediction is that we haven't actually peaked in the heroin epidemic. Massachusetts may have peaked. Rhode Island, Vermont, we may have peaked. I hope we've peaked. But I don't want anybody else to peak. The prediction is actually, as the rest of these states convert to heroin, that we're going to have 500,000 Americans die of opiate overdose. It's heartbreaking. I take care of people every day who've lost family members, or I take care of people who are dead tomorrow. It's heartbreaking. So how do our kids get opiates? In general, our kids don't really use opiates. They just don't. The abuse of opiates has really, really gone down amongst teenagers. It's like 1 or 2%, but they used to get it from us, right? We would have our old bottle of Vicodin from our knee surgery lying around in the medicine cabinet. That was the standard routine. And in the early aughts into 2012, that's where they got it. These days, most everybody in this room has cleaned out their house from their drugs, right? Most everybody in this room has a medicine cabinet with either nothing dangerous in it, or your dangerous drugs, if you happen to use something for chronic pain yourself, are kept under lock and key. And everybody in this room knows you can go to the Northborough Police Station and get rid of your meds, right? Everybody knows that. But do you know that Massachusetts is one of the few states where that's true? My mother-in-law comes from Pittsburgh, and she brings her little bag of pills when she comes to visit to Massachusetts to get rid of in my state, because she can't get rid of them in her state, right? And Pennsylvania is a disaster when it comes to drug use. Massachusetts is way ahead of the rest of the country in 1,000 ways, yet we're still not thriving. So my point is if you haven't cleaned out your medicine cabinet, or by the way, you haven't cleaned out your parents' medicine cabinet, because old people, their house is filled with drugs. Seriously, I go to home visits at people's houses and I'm like, do you mind if I take these 100 bottles away from you because you're not using them, you don't even know what they are, and you have dementia? They go to the police station and they get burned. So our kids get prescribed opiates when they're prescribed opiates, right? They have their wisdom teeth out, they break their femur, they get an ACL tear. So who in this room can tell me a wisdom tooth story? Good or bad? Anybody have a kid with a wisdom tooth recently? Nobody? Yeah, and how many were prescribed?
Actually, she had 4 wisdom teeth taken out. They prescribed some oxys, and we gave her Motrin, never even filled the script.
How many oxys were prescribed, do you know?
12.
12. Okay, so this is interesting. 4 wisdom teeth. They gave her Motrin and didn't give her the prescribed opiate. They were prescribed 12 pills. Now, 5 years ago, the answer was I was prescribed 30 or 60, right? That was the normal answer. But we've seen the rates of prescribing for oral surgery really decline. But when you ask people, how many do you use? And I ask this all the time. Most people say, I use 0, 2, 4, or 6. 6 is the max number I have ever heard. So the truth is, oral surgeons, dentists, they should be prescribing 6 or fewer, right? That's the way it should be. So 12, he had to get rid of 12 pills. They went back to the police station. So when you are taking care of your kid as the protector, as the parent, the grandparent, the aunt, the foster parent, whatever you are, you look at the prescriber and say, how do I treat my kid's pain while limiting their exposure to opiates? Just talk me through the plan, please. And my hope is that most prescribers at this day and age can say, okay, I got this. So here's my piece of paper. We're going to use Tylenol plus ibuprofen. You can use it every 6 hours in these doses. And if plan A doesn't work, and plan B is distraction, music, manual therapy, some acupuncture, and if that doesn't work, here's your prescription in a small volume for some opiates. Okay? It should be stepwise approach, because most people stop at step A and they're all good. And especially if you think you have a strong family history of addiction, if you have a kid who's really anxious or depressed, why give them a drug that might make them feel awesome for the first time in a while? Why do that, right? It's not a good plan. So that's what you do as loving people protecting your kids. How do I help my kid with their pain without exposing them to opiates? If you love somebody, they have an opiate use disorder, you need to know how to use Narcan, right? Narcan is the drug overdose chemical, also called naloxone. It is available at every pharmacy in the state of Massachusetts without a prescription. You have to ask the pharmacist and they will dispense it to you. It runs underneath your insurance. Gazillion videos online on how to use it. It's like a whoop nasal spray. It's like Flovent to your nose. That's all it is. What if somebody's overdose? What if somebody is having a seizure in front of you and you give them Narcan? Will it hurt them? No. Will it help them? No, you call 911 first and you do basic CPR, period, and then you use Narcan, okay? So you should know, if you love somebody who struggles, what this looks like, what overdose looks like. Do school nurses, and do most schools in Massachusetts have Narcan in the nurse's office? Right, and does our school have it here? Thank you very much, awesome. You know who did that? School nurses did that. We didn't have the legislature pass some rule. School nurses got together and said, wow, we could have anybody in our school who has an opiate use disorder. It could be a teacher, it could be a janitor, it could be a parent at a basketball game. What do we know? I have 1,000 EpiPens floating around my school. I should have 1 vial of Narcan. School nurses just made it happen. I didn't ask anybody. I didn't go to the school committee. I wrote an order and Narcan just started, right? It's just the way it went. So school nurses make a big difference in public schools. This is the only state that's like that. Most schools aren't even talking about this. People get better with addiction. It's not always the way you think it's going to happen. They don't do it on the timeline you want them. It takes a lot of things to get better. If you think you're going to be drinking, stop drinking, and you're going to go back to the house where your girlfriend is a heavy drinker, you will not get better. You need structured, sober living. And the biggest thing we're missing in this state, in this country, is sober living for people who are trying to get better. I believe there's 1,000 ways to get better. Therapy, trauma treatment, AA meetings, NA meetings, tons of exercise. I'm a big believer in medicine. If you have an opiate use disorder and you're talking to me, I will spend a long time talking to you about buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone, because I have something that's trying to murder you every single day. I have drugs that are at least 60% effective in helping you. Why would I not use them? I believe in them very strongly, and we need to make methadone more available, because it is a life-saving drug that has been available for 50 years, but most people can't access it, and that's the government's fault. There's a lot of great books on addiction. All of these books are awesome. I'm going to go back to the slide. I have a website. It's just my name, actually, ruthpotee.com. And on this website are articles and this video that gets taped and a talk I give to a bunch of middle schoolers. There's just a bunch of stuff there. I was on Anthony Bourdain once. That's on there, and that's just sad, quite honestly. But so that website has recent stuff on it. These articles, these books are all good. This slide deck is available to anybody who wants it. I am super disorganized. I will not get it to you, but somebody in this building will get it to you. And I don't know who that will be. Maybe it'll be Lisa. But there's a way you'll have it. Maybe the Prevention Task Force will post it somewhere. But anybody who wants it, we could set up an email in the back and they'll email it to you. So I love the people who are taking pictures because they thought to themselves, ooh, I want to remember that. I want to go back and look at this. Just ask for the slide deck. Go give this talk yourself next week anywhere you want. You don't have to credit me. But the more people who understand how the brain breaks with addiction, the better it is. Okay? So what questions do people have? Or is there an organized question and answer?
So, Ms. Connor's going to come up.
Okay. Okay. I can hear people and I'll repeat the question.
Okay, so please, we'll take questions now. If you'd like to raise your hand, myself and Deb Gutterman will kind of go up and down the aisles with the mics.
Thank you, Dr. Potee. It was very informative. I just happened to have seen recently that Mayor Walsh took a trip to Canada, and I have it here, regarding supervised injection facilities.
Mm-hmm.
I somehow think that is sort of ludicrous to encourage and have the taxpayers pay for those people supervising injections so that they're going to convince us that now nobody will die. Okay, I find it ridiculous, and I frankly don't want to pay for it.
So I think it's a great question. I think the way you framed it is really useful because I think you actually express how a lot of people in the room feel. But you guys are understanding the way the brain works with addiction is people are going to continue to use IV injection material whether you want them to or not. They are not going to be magic wand better. And you're already paying for it. And you're paying for it 20 to 1,000 times more than having an operating injection site. Because every time somebody injects through dirty skin and gets an infection of their cardiac valve or spinal abscess, every time that happens, it costs $250,000. We are bankrupting our medical system. Right now, every single hospital out there has endocarditis in the building. 20 years ago when I was in training, we never saw endocarditis. It barely existed. Everybody knows all about endocarditis. 8 weeks of IV antibiotics in the hospital. That's what it takes to fix that. If it doesn't work, then what I do is I crack your chest open and I replace your valve. And sometimes we replace people's valves twice. So right there, I'm now up to $500,000. People will continue to use IV drugs and they will die. And they will have diseases associated with their use, including HIV, which is spiking right now in Boston. The highest rates of HIV transmission just got reported last week. Hep C, every time I treat somebody for Hep C, it's $30,000. That's all, $30,000 drug. Okay, so start doing the math. When I have somebody who sits in front of me injecting an IV drug, I can sit with them, I can make sure their injection site is clean, I can make sure their needle is clean, and most importantly, I can sit with them and say, I know you're tired of this. I know you're sick of running. I know you're sick of the life that you've built. What can I do to help you? Right? Because what do we know with clean needle exchange? We get people into treatment and into recovery, and we get them better. But I need to be there with them in order to make that happen. So I actually, personally, as a public health person, am a big proponent of clean needle exchange and a big proponent of these safe injection sites. That's how I feel. But people live and have different opinions. I believe that. 1/3 of Massachusetts residents are on Mass Health. Nearly 100% of people who are struggling with drug use are on Mass Health. You're already paying for them, my tax-paying friends, okay? You already are paying for them.
This is not a question intended to question that there's a huge issue with opiates. I'm just curious. My own experience with opiates has been very limited, a couple of surgeries along the way, and they've given me medication. I think I've taken 1, maybe 2 of the pills in my lifetime, and both times I felt horrible. So when people talk about this euphoria, I'm wondering, like, what did I miss? I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't feel particularly good to me, but I mean, maybe different people process
Did people
this
hear her
differently.
question that she feels sick when she takes opiates? Who else feels sick when they take opiates? Okay, lovely. Okay, who else gets high when they take opiates? Okay, Okay, only a handful of us. I get super high. I love them. I'm super euphoric on them. I got an opiate for a root canal when I was 35. I was training for a marathon. I looked at the guy. I was like, I got a 10-mile run today. And he's like, okay, your mouth is going to be killing you. And I was like, whatever. And so I had never taken an opiate. I took Vicodin, and I ran from Massachusetts to New Hampshire to Vermont. 28 miles later, I was back at my house. And I was like, that was the best run of my life. And then I thought, I'm high as a kite. Right? But I was 35, my first opiate exposure, super high as a kite, and I thought, whoa, you should not give me opiates because I might have a problem. But if I had been the 15-year-old depressed kid that I was, prescribed an opiate, I would have been in deep fast. That's what I would have been. So opiates do make a lot of people sick. They cause nausea, they cause constipation, and they don't make you feel good. But for many of us, quite honestly, they also make you feel really good. So lucky you that your genetics aren't so good, but it's actually not lucky you if you ever have a serious pain problem and you really need the medicine to help decrease the pain because it seems like you don't tolerate them. Having said that, you know, there's 15 different subtypes of opiates, and we would have to find the one that worked.
Thank you again. I was on a lot of opiates because I had knee replacements and I had screws and a rod taken out of my femur before a replacement and then the replacement. So for me, the drugs were a godsend. I was thrilled I had them.
Yep.
They got me through some really ugly times. I didn't think I was really going to make it with the pain. And sadly, there are a lot of people like me who really, really need the drug.
Yep.
But because of the addicts and those who take advantage of it, we are not getting the medicine we need. And the doctors do not know how, even though they say they do, how to control and deal with people who are in extreme pain.
Yep. So you, again, are bringing up these great points. So this is what we know. The vast majority of us with chronic pain are not going to struggle with an addiction. We think 80 to 85% of people prescribed opiates chronically, meaning over 3 months, because they have spinal stenosis, they have unremitting joint pain, and they're awaiting a joint replacement, they have cancer. The likelihood of that group of people, 85% of them developing addiction, isn't going to happen. It's the 15% that you're worried about, right? It's helping and figuring out who the high-risk people are so you can keep them closely managed, right? But instead, what she describes is true. We've taken a bunch of people who suffer with unremitting pain, and the pendulum is now swung too far. We are cutting people off from their pain meds. Doctors are firing people because they don't want to deal with it anymore because you're so heavily scrutinized as a provider when you prescribe opiates. And so I have people coming to our practice all the time who are like, I haven't done any, they're like little old ladies. I haven't done anything wrong, but my doctor fired me. And then I call the doctor, I'm like, what's up? And they're like, I'm just not dealing with it anymore. And I think, really? This is patient abandonment. That's what that is. And people are being abandoned left and right. So then what happens is people like me who are frontline primary care still happy to provide pain management judiciously with a lot of oversight, and you have to do your physical therapy and show up my shared medical visit for chronic pain, blah, blah, blah. But people like me, I'm a 99th percentile prescriber. I prescribe more opiates for pain than 99% of the doctors in Massachusetts. Every quarter, I get a report card that tells me I'm the worst doctor on the planet. It is so demoralizing. It makes me want to quit my job every day. I hate it. But yet I know, patient to patient, I'm doing the right thing. And in fact, I think the board is going to come after me because I'm a 99th percent prescriber, even though I'm doing everything right. And that makes doctors want to run. It makes you want to quit your job. So the pendulum has swung way too far. But guess what? It's not the addict's fault, right? The truth is that most of the blame, and if you want to blame people, the pharmaceutical industry told us this drug was all fine for everybody, and that's not true. And you know what? As a prescriber, I will never believe what anybody ever tells me ever again, ever. I don't believe anybody. I don't interact with the pharmaceutical industry, and I don't trust anybody when it comes to prescribing. So I just go work with really old drugs. I know what I know after 20 years of practice, and I try to keep my people safe. But I tell you, what she described of people getting cut off, that's true. What do you think? Was there a question right here? No? Okay.
So I think we have time for like one more question. We want to make sure that we leave time for the resource fair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if you can tell the parents here in the audience your opinion on use of antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications for our teenagers who may really need it or may be able to get on top of their issues without using it.
Yeah. So one of the things I think you heard me say is our kids are super stressed out, and you have to see that. You can't blow your kids off when they're freaking out. You need to stay present with them. You need to acknowledge how stressful their life is, that their Instagram friends accounts all look better than they do, and the Kim Kardashians of the world are having an awesome life and they don't. I don't know what is up with our kids, but it's impossible to get into college right now. I don't care if you're the #1 kid in your class, you're still not going to get into college. At least it feels that way. No matter how good you are, how hard you work, you're never good enough in today's society. It feels awful. And I have to say, as a parent, you've got to say to your kids often, I'm worried about how you're feeling. I want to have you learn tools to help mitigate your stress. We're going to do all these things that we know help people. Good therapy, lots of exercise, mindfulness-based meditation. I'm actually a big believer in medicine when those things are not helping enough. And the medicines we use for depression and anxiety in a teenager fall into 3 categories. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs that have norepinephrine involved, and then a handful of other ones. We do not use addictive drugs like benzodiazepams, Ativan, lorazepam, Xanax. Nobody should ever be giving those to your teenagers. And I don't think they do. I don't think anybody out there is prescribing an addictive benzo, right? Because those are super dependency-inducing drugs. You've seen it happen? Okay, that's horrifying to me. But anyway, my hope is it's only in the most extreme cases. But I've been on an SSRI in my lifetime, for sure. I've had clinical depression, and I did everything I could to get out of it, and then I took an SSRI, and it really helped me get through. Just did. I treat kids with adolescents who we've done all the other stuff, and they're still really struggling, and we try them on an SSRI, and it really helps them. And I look at them and I say, I don't think you're going to be on this for your rest of your life. And what we're going to do is we're going to try it for about 9 months, and we're going to see how your life progresses, and then we'll just wean you off of it, and we're going to see how you do. It is such a better option for your kid to be on sertraline or Zoloft or Celexa than to self-medicate with marijuana or alcohol, right? It is such a better option. And I think that the judgment we have, all of us have about these medicine is too harsh. These are effective old meds. I mean, the medicines I'm talking about are 30 years old. Prozac's been around, I think, for almost 40 years now. And I would have no hesitancy about any of my kids taking an SSRI, period. Okay, and that's the standard class we would use. Now, I'm not talking the antipsychotics. I mean, that's a whole different story, but I'm talking straight anxiety and depression. After you do these other hoops and you have them seeing a really good therapist, if you think they're still really struggling and they're crying and they need more help, please go see their pediatrician or family doctor or child psychiatrist and consider medicine, because self-medication is what your kids are going to turn to. Okay, you guys are awesome. It was a great audience. Thank you for coming out on a cold night.